Hello, welcome back. Again, my name is Joan Marso. I'm the Undergraduate Internship and Career Coordinator with Rockefeller College here at the University at Albany. And our next training session is going to be on dealing with some of those real world sticky situations. As we talked about in a previous session, the politics of working with the New York State legislature and being in an office setting and dealing with people from a variety of backgrounds can really present some situations that you might not have found yourself in before. And you might, in the heat of it all, not be sure how to deal with the situation. So we've pulled together some kind of typical scenarios. Some of these things have happened, or similar types of things have happened to interns in the past. And so we're going to give you a chance to kind of think about how you would react, and then give you some advice on ways in which you could react in these types of situations. And hopefully that'll help prepare you for dealing with similar or other types of situations that you might face in your internship. So let's dive right in. In our first scenario, Derek is excited but nervous about getting an internship with the New York State Assembly. Despite the training that he has received, he's still a little confused about a computer program that he's being asked to work with. His supervisor keeps giving him projects to work on that use this program, and Derek is starting to feel extremely overwhelmed. He knows the staff is very busy and wants them to trust him to complete the work, but he feels like he needs more training with the computer program, but he's worried about being perceived negatively if he asks for help. And in fact, he isn't even sure who he should ask. So think about that situation for a little bit. What would you do in that situation? Think about your plan of action, and then pause the recording for a minute. Think about your plan of action, and then you can go ahead and start the recording again and move on to the next slide for some additional advice about that. So what did you come up with? What are some possible responses to scenario one? So one thing that you could do is you could keep trying to figure it out and fall behind on your work. Now, probably not the best idea, because you're going to want to, project a positive image of yourself and show that you can be a productive member of the staff. So while you might do this for a little while, this is not a long-term solution, because you're going to keep falling behind, and that's not going to reflect well on you. You could submit the work knowing that there are mistakes, but again, not a good choice. It's going to reflect negatively on you. It's going to show that you're sloppy. And it might not be the case, but it's going to indicate to them that you don't care about your work. So if you've got questions, they're going to assume that you're going to ask them. Some other things you could do. One thing you could do is find a YouTube video or an online resource for help. And this is a great thing that you might want to do, especially early on as you're struggling with it a little bit. There's some great resources online that might be able to help you figure out a couple of little pieces of it, and that might solve your problem. But it's not the only solution. You could ask another intern for help. If there's somebody else in the office that works on a similar project or similar program, they might be able to give you a little guidance as well. So those are both two good kind of short-term, early on solutions that might help. But if the problem persists, or if you still can't get the answers that you need, you really want to speak to your supervisor and explain that you'd like some additional training on this program so that you can accurately and complete the work. And that really is the bottom line. And your supervisor is not going to look negatively on you if you're asking questions. They want you to succeed. They know this is a learning process. So asking for help is going to show that you really are interested in learning and invested in doing the best possible job. And what other ideas did you come up with? You may have thought of some other things as well that would be a good solution. So that's scenario one. Let's move on to scenario two. So Olivia is enjoying her new internship and is excited to learn more. However, she's noticed that one of the other interns has been making comments and jokes during their lunch break and after intern meetings. And these off-color comments are making Olivia feel uncomfortable. And she starts avoiding the break room and the informal gatherings with the other interns in order to avoid interacting with this particular intern. Another intern Olivia met during her first week has also confided in her that these jokes make him feel uncomfortable too. So how would you handle this situation? pause the recording and take a few minutes to kind of come up with your plan of action on how you'd handle this situation, and then start the recording and move on to the next slide. So what ideas did you come up with? Here's a few solutions that people have suggested in the past. One is to just say nothing and continue avoiding the other intern. And that's probably not a good choice, because you're not going to get the most out of the experience. You're going to continue to be miserable. And we really want this to be a positive experience for you and for all of the interns. Another option might be to just quit your internship. Again, not the best choice. You're probably going to, you want to learn from this. You want to get the academic credits. If you quit your internship, you're not going to be able to finish this program, get the academic credits, and in some cases even graduate. So probably not the best choice for most of you. But what are some things that you could do? One thing you could do, if you feel comfortable, is you could confront the person and tell them that their comments are inappropriate and offensive. You only want to do this if you feel comfortable and you feel it's a safe thing to do. But sometimes it's a really kind of not very contentious situation, and just, as saying that to someone early on, they might not realize it, or they, just haven't been in this kind of a situation before, and that might stop the behavior and solve the problem immediately. Again, only if you feel comfortable. Another thing you could do is you could speak with your supervisor or the internship coordinator for the program. Probably the supervisor would be a better first choice. But if the supervisor isn't able to resolve it, or if the supervisor is the problem, hopefully that's not the case, the internship coordinator for the program would be a good place to go to. And just let them know about the comments and how they're making you feel uncomfortable. Another thing you could do, the scenario mentioned that there was another intern who also had concerns. Maybe the two of you could go together to speak to that person, or you could go together to speak to the supervisor. And another thing that you can always do is you can, especially if the situation escalates or becomes more problematic or isn't resolved with the more immediate solutions suggested previously, is you can report the situation to Human Resources or to the Diversity Office. And you should find out about how to contact those offices in your training. And if you don't, definitely ask your the program coordinator or your supervisor about how to contact those offices should some type of situation like this occur. So, and you maybe came up with other ideas. We'd love to hear more about other suggestions that you might have as well. So let's move on to the next scenario. So scenario number 3, Tanika feels like she's settling in well in her internship after 2 weeks of learning the ropes. She quickly picks up on the types of tasks that are assigned to her, but she knows that she's capable of doing more than collecting and passing out the mail that's delivered every day. She begins to feel frustrated because she wants to be assigned to work on more meaningful projects. So how would you handle this situation? Again, pause the recording, think about your plan of action, and then once you've got kind of a plan, start it back up again and move on to the next slide to see what some of the other possible solutions are. So what are some things that you could do in this case? One scenario is to just do what's assigned and not complain. And that certainly is a fine thing to do. But again, if you're feeling frustrated, you're going to just continue to get more frustrated. So you would like to let them know that you'd like more work. But how do you go about doing that? Another scenario might be, or solution might be, to ask your supervisor for different projects. I'd be a little careful about this, because if you're asking for different projects, that might imply I'm above what you're asking me to do. This seems like, something that's not that I want to spend my time on. So you don't want to convey that kind of a message that you're unsatisfied with the work. You want to phrase that in a different way. And we'll get to that in one of the other options later. Another thing you can do is complain to other interns. And as you know, those types of things doesn't really help. It doesn't solve the problem, and it can create animosity between interns, or it can also just create a negative culture, negative workplace environment. What could you do? One of the best things to do in this scenario is to thoroughly complete the assigned tasks. So you want to do your best job on the things that you've been assigned, and that shows your supervisor that you're committed to the work and you're a team player and you're willing to do what's assigned. And then let the supervisor know that you're available for additional work. So if you're completing those tasks ahead of schedule and you're doing a really good job at them, and then you're asking the supervisor for some additional work, or how else can I help? Or there are other projects, or even saying, I'd love to learn more about this, to give them an idea of the types of things. But you can't be doing that unless you're already completing the tasks and showing that you can do what they've assigned you well first. Because typically they're going to start with more basic tasks and over time assign you more in-depth tasks. But until you prove that you can do the things they've assigned first, they're not going to be ready to give you more additional tasks. Other thoughts, questions, or ideas that you came up with? All right, let's move on to scenario 4. So Carlos is excited about getting an internship with the New York State Senate and generally likes the team that he's assigned to work with. After about 2 weeks of learning the ropes with his job, his team begins discussing a draft of a new bill that would increase government involvement in certain aspects of life in New York State. This bill directly conflicts with Carlos's beliefs. Carlos feels himself getting upset and frustrated about having to work on a project that directly conflicts with his personal beliefs. So, what would you do in this case? How would you handle this situation? Again, pause the recording, think about your plan of action, and then when you're ready, start up again and advance to the next slide. So what are some possible responses to this one? First of all, one thing that you might think, oh, maybe I should just tell the senator or other staff members that you disagree with the bill. In this case, not the best choice. When you are assigned to an office or you're on the staff in a legislative office, the whole purpose of the staff's job is to support the legislation of that senator or assembly member. And you need to put aside your personal opinions on various political issues, and your job while working there is to support the work of that senator or that assembly member. Now, there might be times where they ask for your opinion, and then you certainly can share your opinion in a polite and professional way. But unless your opinion is asked for, your opinion doesn't matter. It's about the goals of the office. So that's not a good choice. Another thing that you might think is, again, complaining to the other interns about having to work on this project. And we already talked about how complaining doesn't really get you anywhere, and it can just create a bad, kind of negative vibe in the work environment. Another thing you might consider, keeping quiet in the office, but complaining about the senator to your friends and family. And again, part of the professionalism and the confidentiality of working in these types of offices is you are presenting a front. I didn't even put it on here, but on social media would be even worse. So you want to be sure that you are keeping quiet is okay in the office, but you're also going to want to keep quiet on that in your personal life as well. It's just not appropriate to be bad-mouthing your supervisor, the senator, or someone like that outside of the workplace. Another option, quit the internship. Again, this doesn't get you what you want. You want to learn from this experience. And going back to that, keeping an open mind that we talked about in one of the previous sessions, and listening for other perspectives, listening to the other sides of the issue and trying to learn from that. And much of legislative work is about compromise. So figuring out how you can learn from other people's perspectives, and maybe that can help continue to shape your perspective on this issue as well. So the kind of, as I was getting at there, the best solution in this case is to view this as a learning opportunity, keep an open mind about the pros and cons of all sides of an issue, and that will help you complete their task as assigned. So additional questions, thoughts about that one? Okay, we have one more scenario to go through. So scenario number 5. Charlotte is excited about getting an internship with the New York State Assembly. She's been assigned to work with a member that is one of her top choices, and she's been working for a few weeks on drafting a bill about changes in gun control laws within New York State. The assembly member she is working with has informed her that the work she is doing is strictly confidential. When Charlotte visits with her high school friends over break, they excitedly ask her about the kind of work she's been doing and her internship. Charlotte feels conflicted about how much to share because she trusts her friends a lot and knows that they wouldn't tell anyone the things that she could share with them. So what would you do in this situation? How would you handle this situation? Again, pause the recording, think about your plan of action, and when you're ready, start back up again and move on to the next slide. So again, you may have thought of a number of possible solutions. One thing that I think some people would be tempted to do would be to tell them all about the bill you're working on, but swear them to secrecy. And here's the problem with that. As much as you trust your friends, you just never know what other people are going to do. And they are not the ones that will get in trouble if something happens. If it gets out and it gets back to the fact that you were the one who shared it, you are the one who is going to lose their internship and lose their job, because you are the one that is employed. You are the one that is working in the office, and you are the one that's been asked to keep this confidential. So no matter how much you trust someone, you just can't tell them things that you've been told are confidential. Another scenario, maybe hedge that a little bit, hint at part of the information, but don't give all the details. Again, in some ways, this can almost be worse, because then if people don't have all the details, it gets blown out of proportion, and the story can get even worse if it gets shared beyond that. So you really need to understand that if you are working on things that are confidential in the office and you've been told that they're confidential, you cannot share them with anyone. So what could you do? Well, one thing you could do is talk about the parts of your job that aren't confidential and focus on what you're learning and who you're meeting, and just share all of the other exciting things you're doing and leave out the part that you can't talk about. And if you're pressed for more details, you can simply state that some aspects of your job are confidential and you could lose your internship if you talked about them. And your friends are going to respect that because they want you to succeed as well. So, any other thoughts or questions about that? So bottom line, these were a variety of situations. Remember that you're being paid to do a job, and everyone wants you to learn and succeed. So there's people here to support you. They want you to learn, but this is a job, and there are going to be expectations that are important that you uphold. And your supervisor, your internship coordinator, the campus liaisons, we're here to help you whenever needed. So most importantly, use these as a way to kind of just pause. If you're faced with a sticky situation, it might be these, it might be something similar, it might be something completely different. But if you're faced with that type of situation, think back to these scenarios and take a pause. Think about what might be the best approach. If you're not sure, reach out to your supervisor, the program coordinator, the internship, somebody, a trusted confidant on campus that could help guide you to give you some ideas about what would be an appropriate way to handle that situation. And again, if you have any questions, you can follow up with Casey, our campus liaison, or myself, or any of the other career counselors on campus to help provide you with some additional insight on any of these situations if you have additional questions. So with that, you're going to give a few questions to answer at the end of this video, and we wish you the best of luck in your internship, and can't wait to hear about all of the wonderful things that you do in your internship.